The alarm screamed its usual harsh metallic complaint. Another day was beginning in the slums. Dae-ho ignored the sound completely. His tiny apartment was freezing cold this morning. He stared at the cracked ceiling with empty eyes. His breath formed small clouds in the air. The notification chime from his cheap phone broke the silence. It was a message from the Hunters Association. His application had been rejected once again. A bitter laugh escaped his chapped lips. He was the lowest of the low. He was officially a trash-grade hunter without a team. He had no prospects and even less hope. His stomach growled with a familiar, painful ache. Rent was due in just 3 short days. He had exactly 5,001 to his name. That was not enough for a single decent meal. He slowly dragged his body out of bed. His muscles ached from yesterday's failed raid. The other hunters had laughed at his weakness. They left him behind without a second thought. He splashed dirty water on his tired face. The mirror showed a man already defeated. His eyes held no light or future ambition. He was just a skeleton going through motions. The world had no use for someone like him. He was a mere cog that did not turn. He trudged through the muddy streets towards the plaza. Lotia hunters gathered there for daily work. The crowd parted as an S-rank convoy passed. Dae-ho looked at the gleaming armored vehicles. He felt a deep and painful envy twist inside. Those hunters lived in a completely different world. They were the gods of this new era. He was just the dirt beneath their expensive boots. A foreman was shouting for portal excavators. It was a dangerous and low-paying job. The dimensional rifts destabilized without any warning. Workers died there almost every single week. Dae-ho pushed his way forward through the crowd. He desperately raised his hand for the work. The foreman looked him up and down scornfully. He snorted, but eventually tossed him a tag. The pay was barely enough for some food, but it was certainly better than absolutely nothing. He joined a group of other desperate men. They were all headed to gate number 983. It was a recently discovered and unstable gate. The official raid team was already inside. Their job was to clear the leftover debris. The gate shimmered with an ominous purple light. A cold dread washed over Dae-ho's body. His instincts were screaming at him to run, but his empty stomach forced him forward. He followed the group into the shimmering rift. The world twisted and turned inside out. They arrived in a dark and cavernous space. The air was thick with ancient dust. The remains of monsters littered the cold ground. The raid team had clearly done their job. The foreman barked orders to start working. Dae-ho picked up a heavy shoveling tool. He started moving chunks of strange rock. A low rumble suddenly shook the entire cavern. The foreman yelled for everyone to stay calm. Then the ceiling above them started cracking. A second raid team had triggered a collapse. Everyone dropped their tools and ran for safety. Rocks began to fall all around them. Dae-ho tripped over a large monster's corpse. He fell hard onto the uneven rocky ground. A sharp pain shot through his twisted ankle. He looked up and saw the collapsing ceiling. The other workers were already far ahead. They did not even glance back towards him. He was alone and completely left behind. A massive boulder sealed the exit path. The air grew thin and filled with dust. This was how his miserable story would end. He would die nameless in a forgotten hole. He cursed the gods and his own wretched fate. He pounded his fist against the unyielding stone. A strange blue light glowed behind the rock. It was coming from a hidden small alcove. He crawled towards it on his hands and knees. His body was screaming in total agony. The alcove contained a small, ancient altar. A single cracked orb sat on its top. It pulsed with a soft and gentle light. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He reached out a trembling and dirty hand. His fingers made contact with the smooth surface. An unimaginable pain exploded inside his skull. Visions of forgotten stars flooded his mind. He saw entities of immense and terrible power. They were sleeping deep within the void. One of them opened its galaxy-like eyes. It spoke a single word directly into his soul. The word was both a question and an answer. Agony became ecstasy, and then became agony again. His body felt like it was being unmade. Every cell was burning with divine fire. He screamed until his voice was completely gone. The blue light consumed him and the cavern. Then there was only an infinite peaceful silence. He woke up much later in total darkness. His body felt strangely light and incredibly powerful. The pain in his ankle was completely gone. He could see perfectly in the pitch black. He pushed against the boulder with one hand. It shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. He walked out of the ruins completely unscathed. The world outside looked completely different now. Colors were brighter and sounds were clearer. He could feel the very energy of life. A strange mark glowed on his right palm. It was a complex and alien symbol. He knew something fundamental had changed forever. He was no longer the same trash great hunter. The forgotten god's whisper was now his power. His final prayer had been answered with fury. The morning sun felt unusually harsh on his skin. He stumbled through the familiar, dirty streets. His body thrummed with a strange new energy. Every sense was dialed up to an impossible degree. He could hear conversations from blocks away. He could see the individual pores on a passerby's face. The overwhelming stimuli were giving him a headache. The mark on his palm pulsed with a warm heat. It was a constant reminder of the cavern. He needed to get home and hide away. He needed to process what had just happened. People glanced at him with slight suspicion. His clothes were torn and covered in dust. He must have looked like a complete madman. He finally reached his decrepit apartment building. He fumbled for his keys with trembling hands. The lock clicked open with a familiar sound. The silence inside was a welcome relief. He leaned against the door and slid down. He held his marked hand up to the light. The symbol was intricate and utterly alien. It seemed to shift if he stared too long. A low hum vibrated deep within his bones. It was the energy from that strange orb. It had fused with his very being somehow. He was not just Kim Dae-ho anymore. He was something else entirely now. A vessel for a power he could not understand. A sudden sharp hunger ripped through his gut. It was a ravenous, an all-consuming need. He scrambled to his feet and went to the kitchen. He found a stale piece of bread. He devoured it in 2 quick bites. The hunger did not subside in the slightest. He needed more, much more, and quickly. He emptied his cupboard of all its contents. He ate canned beans and old rice ravenously. His body was metabolizing it all instantly. The energy within him demanded more fuel. He looked at his last 5,000 won. He would have to spend it all on food. He rushed back out onto the busy street. He went to the cheapest convenience store nearby. He bought every single discount kimbap and bun. The cashier looked at him with wide eyes. He did not care about her judgmental stare. He returned home and tore into the food. The hunger finally began to fade away. A new sensation replaced it soon after. Power crackled at his fingertips like electricity. He felt strong enough to punch through walls. He focused on the empty can on his table. He imagined pushing it with his mind. A faint blue shimmer surrounded the metal can. It wobbled slightly and then fell over. Dae-ho stared at his hands in pure shock. He had just used telekinesis without any training. This was an ability for high-rank hunters only. A frantic knocking came from his front door. His landlord's voice shouted through the thin wood. The rent was 3 days overdue already. Dae-ho felt a surge of sudden confidence. He opened the door to face the angry man. His landlord was a large and bullish person. He demanded the money with a threatening tone. Dae-ho just looked at him calmly and smiled. He told the man he would have it tomorrow. The landlord laughed, a cruel and mocking laugh. He said he would throw all his stuff out. Dae-ho's marked hand pulsed with a blue light. He reached out and grabbed the man's wrist. He did not squeeze with any real force. The landlord's face went from red to white. He felt the immense power in that gentle grip. It was a pressure that promised total obliteration. He stammered an apology and quickly Dae-ho closed the door, feeling a strange thrill. He had never stood up for himself before. This power was already changing his life. But he knew it came with a great cost. The visions of those cosmic entities returned. He saw the sleeping god within his mind. It was ancient and hungry and vast. It had chosen him as its perfect vessel. It was not a gift, but a symbiotic relationship. He would have to feed it more energy. He would have to grow stronger for it. He looked at the Hunter Association app on his phone. He could register for the proficiency test again. This time, the results would be very different. He would show them all what he could do. He would make them regret ever looking down. He was no longer the trash-gret hunter. He was the vessel of a forgotten god. And he was desperately hungry for more. The Hunter Association lobby was a temple of power. Dae-ho walked through its gleaming automatic doors. He had washed his only decent set of clothes. They were still cheap and noticeably frayed. The other hunters in the room were all talking. They stopped to stare at the strange newcomer. Their eyes were full of open disdain and curiosity. A man with a silver ink pin sneered openly. He asked if Dae-ho was lost and needed directions. Dae-ho ignored him and walked to the counter. The receptionist looked up with a practiced fake smile. Her expression cooled when she saw his appearance. She asked how she could possibly help him today. Dae-ho said he was here for a reassessment. He placed his old Afranek license on the counter. The woman picked it up with 2 delicate fingers. She told him the fee was 50,000 won. Dae-ho's confidence faltered for a single second. He had completely forgotten about the cost. He had no money left after buying food. The silver rank hunter behind him laughed loudly. He said trash should stay in its proper place. The mark on Dae-ho's palm began to throb. A wave of anger washed over his entire being. The forgotten god within him stirred from its slumber. It did not like being mocked by insects. Dae-ho's eyes flashed with a faint blue light. He turned to face the laughing silver rank hunter. He asked the man to lend him the money. The hunter laughed even harder at the audacity. He said he would not waste a single penny. Dae-ho took a single step closer to him. He promised to pay him back double tomorrow. Something in Dae-ho's voice made the laughter stop. The hunter felt a sudden chill down his spine. He looked into Dae-ho's intense and glowing eyes. He nervously pulled out his wallet and handed over cash. The entire lobby was watching this strange exchange. The receptionist took the money with a shocked expression. She processed the paperwork for the reassessment test. She directed Dae-ho towards the testing chamber hallway. The silver rank hunter just stood there in confusion. He wondered why he had just done that. Dae-ho entered a stark, white, circular room. A robotic voice welcomed him to the aptitude test. It instructed him to destroy the target dummy. The dummy was made of reinforced military-grade alloy. It was designed to withstand rank attacks. Dae-ho cracked his neck and stretched his arms. The power within him surged forward eagerly. He did not throw a punch or a kick. He simply pointed a finger at the dummy. A beam of concentrated blue energy shot out. It was silent and impossibly fast and precise. It pierced straight through the dummy's chest area. It then continued through the room's back wall. The entire testing apparatus shut down immediately. Alarms began to blare throughout the building. The door to the chamber slid open violently. Several high-ranking association officials rushed inside. They stared at the hole in the wall in disbelief. They looked at the destroyed dummy and then Dae-ho. One official asked what kind of ability that was. Dae-ho just shrugged and said it was simple energy projection. The officials began to argue among themselves loudly. This level of power was not normal for reassessment. They brought in a scanner to check his stats. The device whirred and then sparked and died. The numbers it displayed were simply too high. They thought their equipment must be malfunctioning. They decided to test his physical capabilities. Next, they led him to a strength assessment machine. It was a large piston he needed to punch. Dae-ho made a show of cracking his knuckles. He channeled a tiny fraction of the inner power. His fist connected with the machine's pressure plate. The meter instantly shot up into the red zone. It maxed out its reading and then exploded. Shards of plastic and metal flew everywhere. The officials jumped back in shock and horror. Dae-ho stood there completely unharmed and calm. The mark on his hand was glowing softly now. The god within was enjoying this display immensely. The head official wiped sweat from his brow. He declared that a full review was necessary. They needed to verify these impossible results. Dae-ho agreed to come back the next day. He walked out of the testing chamber calmly. Everyone in the lobby watched him leave silently. The silver rank hunter was still waiting there. Dae-ho handed him 100,000 won. The money had come from the officials for damages. The hunter took it with a trembling hand. He asked Dae-ho what his new rank would be. Dae-ho just smiled, a faint and mysterious smile. He said they did not have a rank for him. He walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The pain from the mark was now completely gone. It had been replaced by a warm, pleasing hum. He had taken the first step towards power, but he knew this was only the very beginning. The real challenges were still waiting for him, and the hunger was already returning. The silence in his apartment was a stark contrast. It felt different from the usual empty despair. It was now a quiet brimming with latent power. Dae-ho sat cross-legged on the thin floor mat. He tried to focus on the energy inside. The divine power was a restless, swirling ocean. He was merely a small boat upon it. His attempts to steer it were mostly futile. The power did what it wanted through him. It had its own ancient and alien will. The hunger from before returned with a vengeance. It was a deep ache in his very soul. He needed to consume more to sustain it. Money was the immediate solution to this problem. He needed funds for vast quantities of food. He also needed better equipment and a new identity. The Hunter Association would be watching him closely now. He could not just take any lowly job. His display had undoubtedly already caused a ripple. He accessed the Hunter network on his cheap phone. He bypassed the official association job board. He went into the darker, unregulated underground forums. Jobs there paid more but carried greater risk. There were no safety protocols or insurance policies. He scrolled through requests for illegal dungeon dives. There were also requests for monster poaching and theft. His eyes stopped on a particular interesting listing. A private collector needed a specific, rare herb. It only grew in a dangerous Sarank dungeon. The dungeon was known for its psychic-type monsters. The PA was 10 million won for a single specimen. It was a fortune he could not ignore. He sent a response using an encrypted proxy. He claimed he could retrieve the herb with ease. The collector responded almost immediately with coordinates. The meeting point was a warehouse in the docks. Dae-ho left his apartment as the sun set. The city lights glittered with false promises ahead. He took a bus to the industrial port area. The warehouse was old and smelled of rust. A sleek black car was parked inside the building. A woman in an expensive suit stepped out. She looked him up and down with clear skepticism. She asked if he was the hunter from the forum. He simply nodded and showed her his glowing palm. The symbol pulsed with a soft blue light. The woman's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She handed him a data chip with the details. She said the herb was deep within the dungeon. The monsters there attacked the human mind directly. Many stronger hunters had lost their sanity inside. Dae-ho told her to have the money ready. He took the chip and left without another word. He arrived at the designated dungeon gate an hour later. It was a swirling vortex of muted colors. The entrance was supposedly guarded by association troops, but they were nowhere to be seen tonight. Someone had clearly paid them to look away. Dae-ho stepped through the gate without any hesitation. The world shifted into a landscape of nightmares. The sky was a perpetual twilight of violet. Twisted trees reached for him with bony branches. He could feel psychic pressure pushing against his mind. It was like a constant whispering in his ears. The forgotten god within him stirred with interest. It found these mental attacks to be amusing. It easily brushed them aside like insignificant cobwebs. Dae-ho walked deeper into the alien forest. Strange creatures with too many eyes watched him. They did not attack because they felt his power. They sensed the predator that now walked among them. He found the herb growing near a glowing pond. Its petals shimmered with an internal silver light. As he reached for it, the ground erupted. A massive psychic centipede monster shot towards him. It screamed inside his mind with psychic fury. Dae-ho did not even flinch at the assault. The god within him reacted with pure instinct. His hand shot out and grabbed the monster's head. Blue energy surged forth and consumed the creature entirely. It turned to dust and then dissolved into nothing. The energy felt satiated for a brief moment. It had fed on the monster's life force. Dae-ho picked the herb and placed it safely away. He returned to the warehouse within 2 hours. The woman was waiting there with a briefcase. She looked at him with newfound respect and fear. She handed him the money without a single word. Dae-ho took the briefcase and turned to leave. She called out and asked for his hunter name. He paused for a moment and then answered. He said his name was Vessel, and then he left. He walked into the cold night with his prize. He had taken his first step into the shadows. He was no longer just a powerless victim. He was now a predator in a world of prey, and the briefcase felt reassuringly heavy in his hand. The briefcase full of money felt incredibly heavy. It was a weight of possibility and new beginnings. Dae-ho did not return to his old apartment. He went to a premium hunter-only district instead. The guards at the entrance barred his way initially. Their eyes scanned his cheap and worn-out clothing. Dae-ho simply opened the briefcase, a small amount. The sight of so much cash changed their attitude. They bowed slightly and allowed him to pass through. The district was another world entirely from his slums. The air itself smelled cleaner and more refined. Shops sold high-performance combat, gear and potions. Restaurants offered monster meat dishes for energy enhancement. He found a discreet hotel for unregistered hunters. He paid for a week in advance with cash. The room was spacious and had a soft bed. He ordered enough food to feed 10 people. The hotel staff brought it up on a large cart. He ate until the terrible hunger finally subsided. The power within him purred like a contented cat. It had been fed well both spiritually and physically. He took a long and very hot shower afterwards. He watched the water run off his body. He looked at his reflection in the steamed mirror. His eyes still held that faint blue flicker. The mark on his palm was now permanently visible. It looked like an intricate and ancient tattoo. He knew the association would eventually find him. His test results were too anomalous to ignore. He needed to establish his new identity quickly. The name Vessa would be his mask from now on. He spent the next day shopping for new gear. He bought black tactical pants and a durable jacket. He purchased a high-end communicator and a new mask. The mask was plain white and covered half his face. It would hide his identity during underground jobs. He also bought a nutrient-rich energy supplement. It was designed to sustain higher-rank hunters on missions. He returned to his hotel room to organize everything. A notification chimed on his new communicator. Then it was a message from the Hunter Association. They requested his immediate presence for a debriefing. They had tracked his financial activity with ease. They knew he was in the Hunter District now. Dae-ho sighed and put on his new clothes. He decided to go and meet them head-on. He arrived at the association's main headquarters again. The same receptionist from before gasped upon seeing him. She immediately called for the head of assessment. Director Park was a stern and powerful-looking woman. She led him into a secure conference room upstairs. She placed a tablet on the table between them. It showed the video of his aptitude test. She asked him to explain the source of his power. Dae-ho remained silent and just looked at her. She then showed him security footage from the dungeon. It was from the Sarank gate he had cleared. Someone had hidden a camera near the herb. They had recorded him obliterating the psychic centipede. Director Parker's face was a mask of controlled calm. She said his power growth was statistically impossible. She accused him of consorting with forbidden entities. Dae-ho finally spoke, and his voice was different. It had a faint echoing quality to it now. He asked if the association feared what it could not control. Director Park's eyes narrowed at his bold challenge. She said they could not allow an unregistered variable. They needed to understand and categorize his abilities. For the safety of the city and its people, Dae-ho leaned forward and placed his marked hand down. The symbol glowed and illuminated the entire room. He told her that some things should not be categorized. He said he would not be their lab rat to study. The door burst open and 4 S-rank hunters entered. They were the association's elite internal affairs team. Their auras were overwhelming to a normal person, but to Dae-ho, they just felt like mild breezes. Director Park stood up and took a step back. She ordered them to detain him for a full evaluation. The lead hunter crackled with lightning around his fists. He told Dae-ho to come quietly, without any resistance. Dae-ho smiled behind his mask for the first time. The forgotten god within him stretched and yawned. It was finally time to play with some new toys. The lead hunter's lightning fist shot toward his face. Dae-ho did not move a single muscle to dodge. The electricity crackled and dissipated against an invisible barrier. The blue mark on his palm glowed with intense light. The hunter's confident smirk vanished into pure shock. Dae-ho grabbed the man's wrist with impossible speed. He applied a gentle but firm amount of pressure. The sound of cracking bones echoed in the room. The hunter screamed and dropped to his knees. The other three S-ranks activated their abilities simultaneously. One created razor-sharp ice shards in the air. Another summoned a whirlwind of crushing gravitational force. The last one became a blur of superhuman speed. They attacked him from 3 different angles at once. Dae-ho simply raised his marked hand toward them. A dome of silent blue energy expanded from him. It moved outward in a perfect, shimmering wave. It dissolved the ice shards into harmless mist. It negated the gravitational whirlwind into nothingness. It stopped the speed. Hunter dead in his tracks. The wave passed through them without causing harm, but it completely erased their manifested abilities from existence. The 3 hunters stood there utterly dumbfounded and powerless. Director Park watched the scene with a pale face. Her hand was shaking as she held her tablet. Dae-ho walked toward her with calm, deliberate steps. He told her that he was not their enemy. He said he would not be controlled or contained. He was a force of nature they could not understand. Trying to cage him would only bring them ruin. He walked past the stunned hunters and the director. He exited the conference room and entered the hallway. Alarms were blaring throughout the entire building now. Reinforcements were undoubtedly already on their way here. He did not hurry his pace down the corridor. He could feel the vibrations of approaching footsteps. A squad of 20 air-rank hunters rounded the corner. They were armed with specialized mana suppression weaponry. They fired nets of crackling orange energy at him. The nets disintegrated before they could even touch him. His mere presence nullified their advanced technology. He continued walking toward the main lobby exit. The hunters parted before him like a red sea. None of them dared to attack him again. They could feel the immense pressure he radiated. It was a primal fear that froze their limbs. He pushed open the front doors and stepped outside. The afternoon sun felt warm on his skin. Reporters and cameras were already gathered out front. News of the incident had spread incredibly fast. They shouted questions about the power he used. They asked if he was a new S-rank hunter. He ignored them all and kept walking forward. The crowd instinctively moved aside to let him pass. He disappeared into the bustling city streets within minutes. He knew his life would never be the same again. The association would now see him as a threat. They would either try to recruit or eliminate him. He preferred the freedom of being an outsider. He returned to his hotel room to gather his things. He needed to find a more permanent, safe house. His communicator buzzed with a new message then. It was from an unknown and encrypted sender. The message contained a single address and a time. It said they shared a common enemy now. It promised answers about the mark on his hand. Dae-ho deleted the message and packed his bag. He would go to this meeting with cautious curiosity. He had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The forgotten god within him seemed intrigued by the offer. It whispered about potential alliances and ancient secrets. Dae-ho put on his white mask and left the hotel. He melded into the shadows of the city once more. He was no longer just a hunter or a vessel. He was a storm that would change everything. The address led him to an old abandoned subway station. It was a relic from before the gates appeared. The air was thick with dust and decay here. Dae-ho moved silently through the dark, crumbling tunnels. His enhanced senses picked up every faint sound. He could hear the dripping of water somewhere ahead. He could also hear a single, steady heartbeat waiting. He rounded a corner and saw a small light. A figure sat at a makeshift table with a lantern. The person wore a long hooded cloak, hiding their features. They gestured for Dae-ho to take the opposite seat. Dae-ho remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. He asked the figure to state their business clearly. The voice that answered was female and surprisingly young. She said she represented a group called the Unseen. They were hunters who operated outside the association's control. They knew about the true nature of his power. They knew he was a vessel for something ancient. Dae-ho felt the god within him stir with interest. It recognized the scent on this young woman. She had a faint trace of similar divine energy. She pulled back her hood to reveal her face. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and pale white hair. A complex mark adorned her forehead like a jewel. It was different from his, but clearly related. She introduced herself as Yuna of the Unseen. She said their group studied the forgotten gods' vessels. They believed the association was hiding a terrible truth. The gates were not random dimensional rifts at all. They were deliberate doors opened by something else. The forgotten gods were the key to closing them, but the association wanted to control that power. They feared what they could not understand or weaponize. Yuna placed a small data drive on the table. It contained files on other vessels like them. Most of them had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The association had taken them for experimentation. Dae-ho finally sat down and picked up the drive. He asked her why she was helping him now. Yuna's expression became grim, and she looked away. She said the association was planning a purge soon. They wanted to eliminate all unregistered vessels. They saw them as threats to their established order. Her group was too weak to fight them openly. They needed someone with his raw power and potential. They could offer him protection and valuable knowledge. They could teach him to control the gods' hunger. Dae-ho considered her offer for a long moment. He did not fully trust her or her organization, but her information matched his own limited experiences. The drive felt heavy with promise and danger. He asked what she wanted in return for this help. Yuna smiled a sad and weary little smile. She said he just needed to survive and grow stronger. His existence was a rebellion against the association. Every day he remained free was a victory. She stood up and handed him a small communicator. It was pre-programmed with a secure contact frequency. She told him to leave the city as soon as possible. Association hunters were already scouring every district for him. She melted back into the shadows of the tunnel. Dae-ho was left alone with the data drive. He returned to his hotel room to examine it. The files contained detailed reports on other vessels. Their abilities were vast and incredibly varied. Some could manipulate time or space itself. Others could command monsters or absorb magic. All of them had been hunted down and captured. The last file was a video recording from a lab. It showed a man with a mark like his. He was strapped to a cold metal table. Association scientists were injecting him with something. The man screamed as his body began to dissolve. His power erupted and then collapsed inward. The video ended with a stark classified stamp. Dae-ho understood the true depth of his danger now. He was not just a threat to them. He was a resource to be harvested and used. He packed his bag with a new determination. He would use Yuna's group for his own goals. He would learn to master the power within him. And then he would make the association pay. The god within him agreed with a vicious hunger. The hotel door exploded inward with a deafening roar. Shattered wood and metal splinters filled the air. Dae-ho rolled off the bed instinctively with lightning speed. 3 figures clad in black tactical armor rushed inside. Their suits bore the Hunter Association Issei Crimson insignia. They moved with synchronized and lethal efficiency. Energy rifles hummed as they targeted his position. Dae-ho did not give them a chance to fire. His marked hand glowed with an angry blue light. A wave of pure force erupted from his body. It slammed the hunters into the opposite wall hard. Their armor cracked under the immense pressure, but more hunters were already pouring into the room. The entire building was clearly surrounded by them. Dae-ho knew he could not fight them all. Not without revealing his full power to everyone. He needed to escape and disappear completely, now. He focused his energy into a single concentrated point. The god within him understood his desperate intention. It eagerly provided the necessary immense power. He punched downward toward the floor beneath his feet. The concrete exploded outward into the room below. He dropped through the hole into someone else's suite. The startled occupants screamed and scrambled for cover. He sprinted for the window and leaped through it. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. He fell 5 stories toward the busy street below. He manipulated energy to cushion his landing gracefully. He hit the ground in a perfect 3-point stance. Pedestrians screamed and scattered in every direction. Association hunters rappelled down the building's side. Their rifles barked with searing bolts of energy. Dae-ho weaved between the attacks with preternatural agility. The bolts melted concrete and asphalt where they hit. He ducked into a narrow alleyway to gain cover. It was a dead end with no exit possible. The hunters closed in from both ends of the alley. They had him trapped, with nowhere left to run. Their commander stepped forward with a smug expression. He ordered Dae-ho to surrender peacefully and quietly. He promised a fair trial and humane treatment. Dae-ho knew it was all a complete lie. He remembered the video of the dissolving vessel. He would not end up on their metal table. The god within him roared its agreement and fury. Dae-ho raised both of his hands toward the sky. The mark on his palm burned like a star. The air itself began to crackle with raw power. The hunters felt the sudden shift in atmosphere. They opened fire with everything they had available. Energy bolts converged on his position simultaneously. A dome of blinding blue light enveloped Dae-ho complete. It absorbed every single bit of their attack. It then expanded outward in a silent shockwave. The wave did not destroy the buildings or ground. It passed through the hunters' bodies harmlessly, but it permanently erased all their mana circuits. Their weapons clattered uselessly to the dirty ground. They collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. They were alive, but completely powerless now. Dae-ho walked through the stunned and broken hunters. He emerged from the alley onto the main street. Association vehicles were screeching to a halt nearby. He knew he needed to leave the city immediately. He remembered Yuna's warning about the coming purge. He activated the secure communicators she had given him. He sent a single-word message, asking for extraction. A response came back almost instantly with coordinates. It was a location at the northern city limits. He moved through the streets like a ghost now. He used his power to blur people's perception. They saw him as just a passing vague shadow. He reached the coordinates in under 10 minutes. It was a rundown auto repair shop garage. The rolling door opened just enough for him. Una stood inside, next a beat-up-looking truck. She tossed him a set of common workers' clothes. She told him to change quickly and get in. They drove out of the city without any issues. The checkpoints were looking for a powerful hunter. They did not notice two simple workers in a truck. Dae-ho watched the city skyline shrink behind them. He had lost his home and his old life, but he had gained a new purpose and direction. The association had made a terrible mistake today. They had unleashed something they could not control, and he would make sure they regretted it deeply. The truck drove on toward a safe, unknown future. The truck drove 4 hours through the dark night. Yuna did not speak a single word the entire time. Dae-ho watched the moon through the dirty windshield. The god within him was curiously silent and observant. They eventually turned onto a hidden dirt road. It was cleverly concealed behind a thick copse of trees. The road led deep into a secluded mountain range. They arrived at a camouflaged entrance, carved into rock. The door slid open silently to admit the truck. They entered a massive underground facility of surprising scale. The cavern was filled with modular living quarters. There were also training areas and a command center. Several other people stopped their work to stare. They all had the same wary and tired eyes. Some of them bore faint marks on their skin. Yuna finally spoke and welcomed him to their sanctuary. She called it the last haven for forgotten vessels. She introduced him to a few of the residents. There was Minjun, who could manipulate density and mass. Sujin possessed telepathic abilities and could read memories. Jiho could phase through solid matter like a ghost. They were all refugees from the association's purge. They looked at Dae-ho with a mixture of hope and fear. They could feel the immense power radiating from him. Yuna led him to a simple private room later. She gave him a datapad with training modules. It contained techniques for controlling divine energy expenditure. It also had information about managing the constant hunger. Dae-ho spent the next few days in isolation. He practiced channeling the god's power in precise ways. He learned to create shields and weapons from energy. He learned to feed the hunger with ambient mana. The other vessels gradually warmed up to his presence. They shared their own stories of persecution and escape. The association had hunted them like animals for years. Their families had been threatened or disappeared entirely. They lived in constant fear of being discovered again. Dae-ho felt a strange new emotion growing inside. It was a protective fury toward these broken people. They had done nothing wrong except exist differently. The god within him echoed this protective instinct. It saw these vessels as kin to be safeguarded. Yuna found him in the training area one evening. She asked him if he understood their purpose now. Dae-ho said he understood their survival was a rebellion. Yuna shook her head with a sad little smile. She said survival was just the very first step. Their true purpose was to reclaim their stolen dignity. They needed to show the association they would not break. She handed him a new mission file with determination. The association was moving a captured vessel that night. They were transporting her to a high-security research facility. The file contained the convoy's route and timing. Yuna asked him if he was ready to fight back. Dae-ho looked at the faces of the other vessels. He saw the desperate hope in their tired eyes. They needed a victory to bolster their broken spirits. He looked down at the glowing mark on his palm. The god within him thirsted for a real challenge. He told Yuna to prepare the others for extraction. He would lead the mission to rescue their comrade. A fierce grin spread across Yuna's face for once. She rushed off to gather their best combatants immediately. Dae-ho stared at his reflection in a metal wall. His eyes glowed with a steady and fierce blue light. He was no longer just running for his life. He was now ready to start his own war. The quiet days of hiding were officially over now, and the association would soon learn true fear. The rescue team moved under the cover of darkness. Dae-ho led Yuna, Minjun, and Ji-ho through the forest. They wore black gear that absorbed all light. The convoy's route was a remote mountain highway below. They reached the ambush point ahead of schedule. Minjun used his power to alter the road's density. The asphalt became soft like thick clinging mud. Ji-ho scouted ahead and confirmed the convoy's approach. 3 armored vehicles, with association insignias, were coming. The lead vehicle was a heavy monosuppression truck. The prisoner would be in the middle vehicle. Dae-ho gave the signal for everyone to get ready. The god within him stirred with anticipatory bloodlust. The convoy hit the softened road section and slowed. The vehicles sank into the asphalt up to their axles. Doors flew open as hunters poured out in alarm. Dae-ho dropped from the trees like a falling star. He landed on the roof of the middle vehicle. His impact dented the reinforced armor plating deeply. He ripped the roof open with his bare hands. Inside, a young girl was chained to the floor. Her eyes were wide with terror and faint hope. 2 hunters inside raised their weapons toward him. Dae-ho snapped his fingers and blue energy flared. The hunters screamed as their weapons melted into slag. He jumped down inside and tore the chains apart. The girl stared at his glowing mark with recognition. Association hunters surrounded the vehicle completely now. Yuna and the others engaged them from the tree line. Minjun created walls of dense air for cover. Ji-ho phased through walls to disorient their enemies. Dae-ho picked up the girl and leaped back out. He landed in the middle of the chaotic battlefield. The lead hunter commander recognized him immediately. He ordered his men to focus fire on Dae-ho. Dozens of energy bolts streaked through the night air. Dae-ho set the girl down gently behind him. He raised his hand and created a blue energy sword. He moved faster than any human could follow. He became a blur of motion and precise destruction. He disarmed hunters without dealing fatal injuries to them. He shattered their weapons and their confidence completely. The commander activated a dangerous mana suppression device. It emitted a pulse designed to disable vessels. The pulse washed over Dae-ho and did nothing. The god within him found the pulse mildly annoying. Dae-ho appeared in front of the shocked commander. He placed his marked hand on the device. It overloaded and exploded in the commander's hands. The blast threw the man backward onto the ground. Dae-ho stood over him with cold, glowing eyes. He told the man to deliver a message for him. He said the vessels would no longer hide in fear. They would fight back until they were all free. The remaining hunters surrendered and dropped their weapons. Yuna secured the vehicles and retrieved valuable intelligence. They found files on other hidden research facilities. They also found lists of captured vessels to rescue. The team returned to the haven with the girl. Her name was Yanji, and she could heal others. The other vessels greeted them with tears of joy. It was their first victory against the association ever. Dae-ho stood apart and watched the celebration quietly. The god within him purred with deep satisfaction. It had tasted battle and found it Very good. Dae-ho knew this was only the beginning for them. The association would retaliate with overwhelming force soon, but for tonight, they had won an important battle. And he had found a new reason to fight. The celebration in the haven was short-lived, but sweet. Yoonji's healing powers mended the team's minor injuries. The stolen intelligence files were decrypted with frantic speed. The data revealed a horrifying and vast network. The association had facilities across the entire country. Each one held captured vessels for brutal experimentation. The files contained detailed logs of their suffering. The purpose was to weaponize their divine power. They sought to create controllable super soldiers for war. Dae-ho read the reports with growing cold fury. The god within him mirrored his dark anger. It whispered promises of vengeance and utter destruction. Yuna called for a council meeting that evening. All the vessels gathered in the main cavern. Their faces were grim under the soft lights. Yuna presented the full scope of the threat. The association was not just capturing them anymore. They were actively hunting down vessel families now. They used loved ones as leverage for compliance. A silent tear rolled down Sujin's pale cheek. Her younger sister had been taken months ago. Dae-ho stood up and faced the assembled group. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. He said hiding would not protect them anymore. The association would never stop hunting them down. Their only path forward was to fight back. They needed to become the hunters themselves now. They would target the association's research facilities directly. They would free every vessel held captive inside. They would shatter the association's sense of security. A wave of fear went through the crowd. These people were survivors, not soldiers or warriors. But then Minjin stood up beside Dae-ho firmly. He said he was tired of living like a rat. Ji-ho and Sujin also rose to their feet. Others followed their example, one after another. Soon the entire haven was standing together. United, a new determination hardened their once fearful eyes. They began planning their first offensive operation immediately. They chose a nearby facility called Delta Base. It was a medium-security genetic research lab. Intelligence indicated it held at least 5 vessels. The attack would occur in 48 hours. They used the stolen files to study the layout. They knew god patrol routes and security measures. They identified ventilation shafts and emergency exits. Dae-ho would lead the assault team inside. Una would coordinate from a remote command post. Minjin and Ji-ho would handle perimeter control. Sujin would jam communications and disable alarms. Yoonji would be on standby for medical support. The hours before the attack were tense and quiet. Dae-ho meditated to commune with the inner god. He asked for its power and its cooperation. The entity responded with an eager, bloodthirsty anticipation. It showed him visions of ancient battles and conquest. It taught him a new way to channel energy. He could now create localized gravitational fields. The team moved out under the cover of night. They approached Delta Base through a forested area. The facility was a stark, concrete compound ahead. Lights swept across the grounds from high towers. Dae-ho gave the signal for the operation to start. Sujin focused her telepathy on the command center. She made the guards see false readings on screens. Ji-ho phased through the outer walls silently. He unlocked a side door for the others. Dae-ho and Minjin slipped inside like shadows. They moved through sterile white corridors quickly. They reached the main holding area without incident. 5 emaciated vessels were in clear containment cells. Their eyes were hollow from endless tests and pain. Dae-ho's mark flared with a furious blue light. The god's rage echoed his own boiling anger. He shattered the cell doors with a thought. The freed vessels looked at him with stunned hope. Alarms finally blared throughout the facility. Then the association had discovered their intrusion somehow. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor toward them. The real battle was about to begin now, and Dae-ho was more than ready for it. The heavy footsteps belonged to enhanced combat androids. Their metal frames gleamed under the harsh emergency lights. Red sensors scanned the hallway for biological targets. They raised arm-mounted plasma cannons toward the group. Dae-ho pushed the freed vessels behind him protectively. Minjin stepped forward and clenched his fists tightly. He increased the density of air around the androids. Their movement slowed, as if moving through thick syrup. Dae-ho unleashed a precise wave of blue energy. It short-circuited their internal systems completely. The androids sparked and collapsed into inert metal. But more enemies were already on their way. Association hunters in full combat gear rounded the corner. They fired specialized mononullification grenades down the hall. The grenades emitted a pulsating orange disruptive field. Dae-ho felt the god within him recoil slightly. This technology was designed specifically for vessels. Minjun cried out as his power flickered and failed. The hunters advanced behind energy shields with confidence. Dae-ho's eyes glowed with an intense, furious light. The god despised this attempt to cage its power. Dae-ho did not try to use fancy techniques. He simply charged forward with impossible speed. He moved faster than the nullification field could adapt. He tore through the energy shields with his bare hands. He disarmed hunters with precise and brutal strikes. He was a whirlwind of controlled divine fury. He left a trail of unconscious bodies behind. The freed vessels watched with awe and newfound hope. They had never seen such raw power before. Yuna's voice crackled over the communicator with urgency. She said reinforcements were arriving from a nearby base. They had 5 minutes to exit the facility. Dae-ho ordered Minjun to lead the vessels out. He would cover their retreat from the rear. They moved quickly toward the designated extraction point. Ji-ho was already waiting with the vehicle running. Sujin reported that aerial units were inbound now. They needed to leave immediately to avoid capture. Dae-ho was the last one to reach the truck. He looked back at the chaotic facility behind them. Hunters were scrambling, but unable to pursue yet. He felt a strange pulling sensation in his mind. It was coming from deep within the facility. The god within him stirred with keen interest. It sensed another presence like itself down below. Dae-ho knew they had missed a hidden level. Another vessel was still trapped in a sub-basement. He told Yuna he was going back inside. She screamed at him that it was a suicide mission. He ignored her and ran toward the facility again. He used his power to blur past the hunters. He followed the psychic pull down a stairwell. It led to a reinforced door with a keypad. He melted the lock with a touch of his hand. The door opened to reveal a sterile lab. A young boy was suspended in a liquid tank. Wires and tubes connected to his small body. His eyes opened and met Dae-ho's gaze. The mark on the boy's chest glowed softly. It was the same as Dae-ho's, but inverted. The god within Dae-ho roared with recognition and rage. This was not just any ordinary captured vessel. This was something much older and more powerful. This was the source of the facility's energy. The association was using him as a battery. Dae-ho shattered the tank with a single punch. He caught the boy as he fell forward weakly. The boy whispered a single ancient word into his mind. The word meant brother in the language of gods. The entire facility began to shake violently then. Alarms blared with a new and more urgent tone. An automated voice warned of a core breach imminent. Dae-ho lifted the boy onto his back firmly. He ran back through the crumbling hallways quickly. He burst out into the cool night air outside. The truck was still waiting for him, miraculously. They sped away just as the facility exploded behind them. The fireball lit up the entire night sky. Dae-ho looked at the unconscious boy in his lap. He knew nothing would ever be the same again. The god within him was now wide awake, and it was very, very interested in the boy. The truck raced away from the fiery explosion behind them. The unconscious boy lay across Dae-ho's lap, breathing shallowly. His inverted mark pulsed with a soft golden light. It was a mirror image of Dae-ho's own blue one. The god within Dae-ho was utterly fascinated by him. It whispered ancient secrets about duality and balance. Yuna stared at the boy with wide, shocked eyes. She asked Dae-ho what he had done back there. Dae-ho simply said he found another lost brother. They returned to the haven under the cover of night. The other vessels gathered around the new arrival, nervously. Yoon-ji used her healing powers on the boy gently. Her energy recoiled from him, as if burned. She said his body was not entirely human anymore. It was more like a condensed form of pure energy. The boy woke up several hours later in medbay. His eyes were pools of molten gold and wisdom. He looked at Dae-ho and spoke without moving his lips. His voice echoed directly inside everyone's mind there. He said his name was Kael, and he was ancient. He was the vessel for a god of creation. Dae-ho's entity was a god of destruction. They were two halves of a single complete whole. The association had discovered him centuries ago, asleep. They had kept him dormant and harvested his power. They used it to fuel their weapons and technology. This was the true source of their advanced magic. The other vessels listened in stunned and horrified silence. Their entire world was built on a captured god. Kael explained the forgotten history of their kind. The gods came from a dimension outside their own. They sought refuge here during a great cosmic war. They bonded with willing humans to survive and hide. The association learned of this and feared their power. They launched a great purge to capture them all. They rewrote history to erase the gods' existence. They turned the vessels into monsters and legends. Kael's energy was fading rapidly from the awakening. He needed to return to a dormant state soon, but he gave them one final crucial piece of information. There was a place where the truth was stored. It was a hidden temple beneath the Hunter Association headquarters. It contained a relic that could restore their memories. It could awaken the full power within every vessel. It could also free Kael from his endless cycle. Dae-ho knew what he needed to do next. He would infiltrate the association's main headquarters itself. He would find this temple and reclaim their history. Una argued that it was a suicide mission. The headquarters was the most fortified place on Earth. Dae-ho looked at Kael's weakening form and then at the others. He saw the hope and fear in their eyes. He said he was not going there alone. He would take a small team of their best. They would strike at the heart of their enemy. They would steal the truth right from under them. The god of destruction within him roared in approval. It longed to tear down the walls of its jailers. The plan was formed with frantic and desperate speed. They would use the chaos of the recent attack. The association would be focused on external threats. They would never expect an attack from within. Dae-ho, Ji-ho, and Sujin would form the team. Ji-ho could phase through walls and security systems. Sujin could manipulate minds and create illusions. Dae-ho would provide the raw power and protection. They would leave at first light the next morning. The fate of every vessel rested on this mission, and Dae-ho would not allow them to fail. The Hunter Association headquarters loomed over the city skyline. It was a towering monument of glass and steel. Dae-ho, Ji-ho, and Sujin observed it from a distance. Their plan was audacious and incredibly dangerous. They would use the main sewer access tunnel. It ran directly beneath the building's foundation. Ji-ho's phasing ability could get them through reinforced concrete. Sujin would handle the security personnel and cameras. Dae-ho would be their shield and their weapon. They entered the sewer system through a maintenance hatch. The smell was foul and overwhelming to their senses. They moved through the dank tunnels in complete silence. Ji-ho led the way with a detailed map. They reached a point directly under the headquarters. Ji-ho placed his hands on the concrete ceiling. He focused his energy and began phasing through it. Dae-ho and Sujin followed him up into a basement. It was a sterile utility room with humming servers. Sujin closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She located the guards on this level easily. She planted false images in their minds of emptiness. The coast was clear for them to proceed further. They needed to reach the sub-basement 20 levels down. The elevators were far too risky to use. They found a maintenance stairwell used by engineers. They descended quickly but with extreme caution. Each level down had increased security measures. Laser grids and motion sensors filled the corridors. Ji-ho phased them through each obstacle effortlessly. Sujin continued to cloud the minds of guards. They reached sub-basement 15 without any major issues. Then they encountered a door unlike the others. It was made of a strange, dark alloy. It had no visible handle or keypad. Ji-ho tried to phase through it, but failed. His power fantan ate off the material violently. He stumbled back with a pained expression. The door was designed to counter phasing abilities. Dae-ho stepped forward and examined the door closely. His mark glowed as he sensed the energy within. It was made from a material that absorbed magic. He placed his palm flat against the cold surface. The god within him recognized the alloy esse composition. It was forged from the essence of a dead god. The association had truly plundered every possible resource. Dae-ho focused his energy into a single ultra-fine point. He pushed against the door with all his might. The alloy resisted his power for a long moment. Then it began to heat up and glow red. A small hole appeared under his intense pressure. The hole expanded outward until the door dissolved. They stepped through into a vast, dark space. It was not a man-made corridor at all. It was a natural cavern hidden deep underground. The air was thick with ancient dust and power. Strange glowing fungi provided an eerie blue light. The walls were covered in intricate carved murals. They depicted the true history of the gods' arrival. They showed the first vessels and their great pact. They also showed the association's betrayal and purge. At the center of the cavern stood a stone archway. It was covered in runes that pulsed with energy. This was the temple that Kael had spoken of, but they were not alone in this sacred space. A figure stepped out from behind the archway. It was Director Park from the assessment division. Her eyes glowed with a cold, artificial light. She was not entirely human anymore either. She had enhanced herself with stolen divine energy. She welcomed them to the association's greatest secret. She said they were fools for coming here themselves. She activated a device on her wrist quickly. The runes on the archway flared with bright light. Energy barriers snapped into place around the cavern. They were trapped inside with her and her secrets, and she looked very eager to finally capture them. Director Park's smile was a cold and cruel thing. She said she had been expecting their arrival eventually. The energy barriers hummed with contained immense power. Dae-ho tried to phase through the nearest wall. He cried out as his power failed him completely. Sujin attempted to breach Director Park's mind next. She recoiled with a sharp, pained gasp instantly. The director's mind was a fortress of alien thoughts. She had integrated Godtech into her very consciousness. Director Park raised her hand and flicked her wrist. Invisible force slammed Dae-ho and Sujin against the wall. They struggled against the pressure, but could not move. Dae-ho stepped forward with his mark blazing brightly. He demanded that she'll release his comrades immediately. Director Park laughed and said he was in no position. She was the master of this sacred place. She controlled the very ley lines of power here. She gestured toward the ancient archway behind her. She said it was the first gate ever documented. The association had built their headquarters above it deliberately. They siphoned its energy for over a century now. She had personally overseen the harvesting of Kael. She considered the vessels to be natural resources. They were meant to be used for human progress. Dae-ho felt the god within him rage at this. Its fury was a wildfire in his veins. He did not bother with words or threats. He simply attacked her with a spear of blue energy. Director Park deflected it with a casual wave. The energy dissipated against her personal shield harmlessly. She retaliated with a whip of crackling orange light. It wrapped around Dae-ho's body and squeezed tightly. It burned through his clothes and into his skin. The pain was immense and designed to suppress power. The god within him roared in defiance and pain. Dae-ho focused on the mark on his palm. He remembered the feeling of the infinite void. He channeled that vast emptiness into the whip. The orange light flickered and then shattered into pieces. Director Park's eyes widened with surprise and interest. She said his growth was truly remarkable and fascinating. She would enjoy dissecting him to understand it. She launched a volley of energy projectiles at him. Dae-ho created a swirling vortex to absorb them. He then redirected them back toward her swiftly. She created a barrier but was forced back a step. This was the opening Dae-ho needed desperately. He focused his power not on her, but on the archway. He poured his energy into the ancient runes. The archway began to glow with an intense light. Director Park screamed at him to stop immediately. The archway was not meant to be activated fully. It would open a permanent gate to their dimension. Dae-ho ignored her and pushed more power into it. The runes flared and then began to shift shape. The energy barriers around the cavern flickered and died. Dae-ho and Sujin collapsed to the ground free. Director Park looked at the activating archway with terror. She turned and fled through a hidden exit quickly. The cavern began to shake violently all around them. Stones fell from the ceiling as the archway activated. A shimmering portal of swirling colors appeared within it. Dae-ho grabbed his comrades and pulled them toward it. They had to escape before the entire place collapsed. They jumped through the portal just as the ceiling gave way. The world twisted and turned inside out around them. They landed in a field of strange, glowing flowers. 2 moons hung in a violet sky above them. The air tasted of ozone and raw power. They were not in their world anymore at all. The portal closed behind them with a final snap. They were stranded in the gods' home dimension now, and something ancient was already stirring in the distance. It had sensed their arrival, and it was coming. The air itself felt alive and hungry around them. The 2 moons cast an eerie dual shadow. Strange plants pulsed with a soft internal light. Dae-ho and Sujin stared in stunned, terrified silence. They were stranded in an alien and hostile world. Dae-ho's mark burned with a strange new intensity. The god within him was finally home again. It sang with a joy that was almost painful. The stirring in the distance grew much louder quickly. The ground began to vibrate beneath their feet. A colossal creature emerged from the glowing forest. It had too many eyes and shifting limbs. It was made of crystal and raw energy. It moved toward them with terrifying deliberate speed. Sujin tried to influence its mind but screamed. Her telepathy was overwhelmed by its alien thoughts. Dae-ho attempted to phase, but the ground resisted him. The very laws of physics were different here. Dae-ho pushed them behind him and stood firm. The creature loomed over them like a mountain. It did not attack, but instead studied them. It focused its many eyes on Dae-ho's mark. It made a series of complex clicking sounds. The god within Dae-ho understood the language perfectly. It was a greeting between ancient kindred beings. The creature was a guardian of this realm. It asked why a vessel walked here alive. Dae-ho spoke with the god's voice echoing strangely. He said they sought knowledge and a way home. The guardian considered his words for a long moment. It then turned and gestured for them to follow. They had no other choice but to obey. It led them through the bizarre, glowing landscape. They saw creatures of impossible shape and size. They saw rivers of light and mountains of crystal. The guardian brought them to a vast city. The structures were organic and grown, not built. Beings of pure energy moved through the streets. They all stopped to stare at the humans. The guardian took them to a great central spire. An entity of immense power waited inside for them. It looked like a swirling nebula contained in form. It spoke directly into their minds, with ancient authority. It called itself the Chronicler of Forgotten Times. It knew of the vessels and their great plight. It said the association had broken an sacred pact. Humans and gods had once lived in harmony. The association feared the gods' power and rebelled. They launched a war they could not possibly win. They used cowardly tricks to capture and subdue. The chronicler showed them visions of the past, great cities of humans and gods working together. Then came the betrayal and the purges. The gods were hunted and imprisoned or killed. The few that survived fled back to this dimension. The association then rewrote history to hide their sins. They labeled the gods as monsters and invaders. Dae-ho felt the truth resonate in his soul. The god within him wept for its lost kin. The chronicler said the balance had been broken. The human world would soon face a great calamity. The association's theft of power was destabilizing reality. Only the true vessels could restore the natural order. They needed to reclaim their rightful place as bridges. Dae-ho asked how they could possibly return home. The chronicler gestured toward a pool of swirling light. It was a temporary gate to their world, but it would only remain open for a short time. They needed to leave immediately to survive the journey. Dae-ho refused to leave without the chronicler's help. He said his people needed to know the truth. The chronicler agreed to send an emissary with them. A fragment of its power entered Dae-ho's mark. It would serve as a guide and a witness. They stepped into the pool of light together. The world twisted and tore itself apart again. They landed back in the collapsing cavern under headquarters. The emissary's presence within Dae-ho filled him with purpose. He was no longer just a weapon for revenge. He was now a messenger for 2 entire worlds, and he would make sure the truth was heard. The cavern was filled with dust and falling debris. They had returned to chaos and imminent danger. The portal had deposited them near a collapsed wall. Dae-ho quickly phased through rubble to find an exit. Sujin used her mind to send surviving guards. They were disoriented and fleeing the collapsing structure. Dae-ho felt the chronicler's emissary stirring within his mark. It was a calm presence amidst the turmoil. It showed him a path to the surface. They emerged into a hidden maintenance tunnel nearby. Alarms blared throughout the entire association headquarters above. Their intrusion had triggered a full-scale lockdown procedure. They moved quickly through the narrow service passages. The emissary guided Dae-ho with subtle psychic impressions. It wanted to reach the central broadcasting room. The truth needed to be heard by everyone. They encountered a squad of guards blocking their way. The guards raised their weapons with shaky hands. They had never seen a lockdown of this magnitude. Dae-ho did not want to fight them unnecessarily. The emissary within him reached out with its power. The guards' eyes glazed over for a moment. They lowered their weapons and stepped aside silently. The emissary had shown them a glimpse of truth. They saw the association's betrayal and their lies. The guards were too stunned to do anything. Dae-ho and his team continued toward their goal. They reached the central communications hub on floor 50. The door was sealed with emergency reinforced plating. Dae-ho placed his marked hand on the metal. The emissary's power flowed through him and into the door. The plating dissolved into harmless particles of light. Inside, technicians were trying to restore systems frantically. They looked up in shock at the intruders. Sujin focused her power on all of them. She made them sleep peacefully at their stations. Dae-ho approached the main broadcast console confidently. The emissary within him understood the technology instantly. It guided his hands over the complex controls. He patched into every public and private channel. His face appeared on screens across the entire city. He began to speak with a voice not entirely his. It was layered with the echoes of the chronicler. He revealed the true history of the gods. He spoke of the pact and the great betrayal. He showed them the visions of harmony and peace. He exposed the association's experiments and their lies. He revealed the existence of the captured god Kael. The city watched in stunned and disbelieving silence. Then he showed them the other world briefly, the beautiful and terrible dimension of the gods. He told them the balance was breaking down. Reality itself would soon unravel without correction. He called for the immediate release of all vessels. He demanded the association surrender its ill-gotten power. The broadcast was cut off after several minutes. Armed response teams were storming the communications hub. Dae-ho and his team had already left the room. They fought their way toward the building's roof. The emissary's power made Dae-ho stronger than ever. He moved through the hunters like a force of nature. He disabled them without causing permanent harm. They reached the roof as helicopters circled above. Sniper rounds ricocheted off a personal energy shield. The emissary created the shield without any effort. Dae-ho looked out over the city he once called home. He could feel the confusion and fear below. He could also feel a few sparks of hope. The truth was now loose in the world. It would spread like an unstoppable wildfire. A familiar black truck sped toward the building. It was Yuna and the others from the Haven. They had seen the broadcast and came to help. They fired a grappling hook up to the roof. Dae-ho secured it, and they rappelled down quickly. They drove away from the chaotic headquarters. The city was descending into controlled panic around them. The association's grip on the truth was finally broken. But the real battle was only just beginning. The emissary within him settled content for now. It had accomplished its first and most important task. The seeds of change were now planted deeply. They would either grow into salvation or destruction. Dae-ho knew the association would not yield quietly. They would fight to protect their power and lies, and he would be ready to meet them head-on. The city erupted into chaos after the broadcast ended. People flooded the streets, demanding answers and transparency. Association and forces struggled to contain the angry crowds. News networks replayed segments of Dae-ho's speech endlessly. Experts debated the validity of his shocking claims. The government remained silent and did not comment. Dae-ho and his team returned to the Haven. The other vessels greeted them as returning heroes. But the celebration was tense and short. They knew the association would retaliate with overwhelming force. Yuna reported that military movements were already underway. They were surrounding the city with suppression units. The association was preparing to silence everyone permanently. Dae-ho gathered all the vessels in the main cavern. He told them the time for hiding was over. They needed to stand together and fight. They would protect the people from the association's wrath. They would show the world what true power meant. The vessels nodded with determined and fierce expressions. They began preparing the haven for a siege. They reinforced the entrances with their combined abilities. Minjun solidified the rock walls to diamond density. Sujin set up psychic early warning systems. Dae-ho created escape tunnels through the solid earth. Yangi prepared a medical station for the wounded. Dae-ho meditated to commune with the emissary inside. It showed him how to channel power to others. He could create a network between the vessels. They would share strength and knowledge seamlessly in battle. He taught them the technique through mental link. Their marks glowed as they connected to each other. They became a single united consciousness with many bodies. The association's forces arrived at nightfall. As expected, tanks and helicopters surrounded the mountain entrance. Director Park's voice echoed from a loudspeaker outside. She ordered them to surrender peacefully or face annihilation. Dae-ho walked out alone to meet the army. He stood before the assembled might of the association. He told Director Park a reign of lies was over. She responded by ordering her troops to open fire. Shells and energy bolts streaked toward his position. Dae-ho raised his hands and created a massive dome. It shielded the entire mountain from the bombardment. The other vessels poured out of the haven behind him. They moved with perfect coordination through the mental network. Minjun created pitfalls under the tank's treads. Sujin turned soldiers' weapons against each other with illusions. Dae-ho phased into vehicles and disabled their engines. Yoonji healed any civilians caught in the crossfire. Dae-ho focused on the association's elite hunter teams. They were the real threat among the regular forces. He moved through the battlefield. Like a blue comet, he disabled hunters with precise and non-lethal strikes. He wanted to prove they were not monsters. Director Park watched from a command vehicle with fury. She activated a secret weapon she had prepared. It was a frequency emitter designed using Kael's energy. It targeted the mental network connecting the vessels. The vessels cried out as the connection was severed. They stumbled and clutched their heads in pain. Dae-ho felt the emissary within him struggle against it. The frequency was specifically designed to disrupt divine energy. Director Park's laughter echoed over the battlefield. She thought she had finally defeated them completely, but she had underestimated the depth of their bond. The vessels did not need the network to unite. They reached for each other's hands, physically. Their combined marks created a resonance that countered the frequency. The emitter overloaded and exploded in a shower of sparks. Director Park's command vehicle was exposed and vulnerable. Dae-ho leaped onto its roof and tore it open. He found Director Park cowering inside with her technicians. He did not strike her or even touch her. He simply showed her the emissary's full power. She saw the infinite history of the gods. She saw the beauty of the world they lost. She saw the petty fear that drove her actions. She collapsed to her knees, weeping uncontrollably. The battle ended as the association forces lost their leader. The vessels had won their first major victory. But Dae-ho knew this was only a battle. The war for the soul of humanity continued. And he would see it through to the end. The silence after the battle was deafening and heavy. Association soldiers lowered their weapons in confused surrender. The vessels rounded up the remaining forces efficiently. They secured Director Park and her command staff. The mental network hummed with relief and cautious joy. But Dae-ho felt a new disturbance in the air. The emissary within him was growing agitated and restless. It sensed a great imbalance forming elsewhere. The sky above them began to darken unnaturally. The two moons from the other dimension became visible. They shimmered into existence over their own sun. Reality itself was fraying at the edges. The chronicler's warning was coming true before their eyes. The association's stolen power was destabilizing the dimensional barriers. The ground shook with deep and powerful tremors. Cracks of violet energy split the air randomly. People screamed as the world started coming apart. Dae-ho knew what he needed to do now. He had to free Kael from his prison. Only the combined power of both gods could heal the rift. He left the battlefield without a single word. He moved through the crumbling city with impossible speed. The association headquarters was damaged, but still standing. He entered through a gaping hole in its side. The interior was chaos, with people fleeing everywhere. He followed the pulling sensation in his mark. It led him down to the deepest sub-basement, a Kael chamber behind a reinforced door. The boy was weaker than when he left him. His golden light was flickering like a dying candle. The machines were draining him faster than ever. The dimensional instability was consuming his energy ravenously. Dae-ho shattered the machines with a furious roar. He gently lifted Kael from the broken harness. The boy's eyes opened with immense effort. He whispered that it was already too late. The damage to the dimensional fabric was too great. Their combined power might not be enough anymore. Dae-ho refused to accept that grim outcome. He carried Kael up to the roof of the building. The sky was a terrifying tapestry of broken realities. They could see other worlds bleeding into their own. Strange creatures fell from the cracks and screamed. The city was becoming a nightmare landscape of chaos. Dae-ho placed Kael down carefully on the roof. He joined their marked hands together firmly. The blue and gold symbols glowed with intense light. The two gods within them stirred and recognized each other. They had been apart for far too long. Their reunion created a shockwave of pure energy. It expanded outward from the rooftop in a wave. The wave stabilized the crumbling reality around them. The dimensional cracks sealed shut where it passed. The alien creatures dissolved back into their own worlds. But the wave began to weaken after a few miles. Their power was not infinite or all-reach. They needed a permanent anchor to hold reality together. The emissary within Dae-ho provided the solution then. It would sacrifice itself to become that anchor. It would bind itself to the world's ley lines. It would require a constant source of power. Dae-ho and Kael would need to remain connected. They would become the guardians of the new balance. They would never be able to leave this spot. Dae-ho accepted this fate without any hesitation. Kael also agreed with a calm, serene smile. They joined their hands again and focused their energy. The emissary flowed out of Dae-ho and into the world. It sank deep into the planet's core below. A network of golden light spread across the entire globe. The dimensional rifts closed permanently one by one. The sky returned to its normal blue color. The two moons faded from view completely. The world was saved, but at a great cost. Dae-ho and Kael sat together on the roof. Their bodies were now made of crystalline energy. They were forever part of the planet they saved. They could see every corner of the world simultaneously. They could feel the joy and relief of billions. They had become the throne of forgotten divinity, and their reign over the ruins would now begin. The world awoke to a dawn of fragile peace. The dimensional tears had vanished from the sky. The sun rose normally over a healing city. People emerged from shelters with cautious, hopeful steps. They looked toward the association headquarters with reverence and awe. The crystalline figures of Dae-ho and Kael were visible. They sat silently on the roof, shining softly. Their bodies were networks of glowing energy lines. They were now part of the world's structure. They saw everything and knew everything happening below. Yuna and the other vessels climbed to the roof. They approached the crystalline forms with tears in their eyes. They could feel the immense power radiating from them. They could also feel the sacrifice that had been made. Yuna placed her hand on Dae-ho's crystalline shoulder. She promised to rebuild the world properly this time. She would lead the vessels in his stead. They would create a new council for governance. It would include humans and vessels working together. They would expose the association's remaining secrets and crimes. They would free any other imprisoned gods found. The vessels bowed to their silent, eternal guardians. They then descended to begin the great work. The world underwent a rapid and dramatic transformation. The truth about the gods was fully accepted. The association was dissolved, and its leaders tried. New laws protected vessels and their unique nature. The technology powered by stolen energy was dismantled. Humans learned to use magic responsibly and ethically. The mental network between vessels remained active always. They could feel Dae-ho and Kael's presence constantly. It was a comforting guide in difficult times. Years passed, and the world truly healed. Cities were rebuilt with beautiful, harmonious designs. Nature reclaimed spaces it had lost long ago. The haven became the new capital of governance. Yuna served as its first fair and just leader. She often visited the rooftop of the old headquarters. She updated the crystalline figures on world events. She felt their approval in the warmth of the sun. One day, a new crisis threatened the world. A remnant of the association activated an old weapon. It targeted the ley lines that stabilized reality. The weapon began to drain energy from the core. The dimensional cracks threatened to reopen in the sky. People panicked as the ground shook violently again. Yuna and the vessels rushed to the weapon's location. They fought desperately to disable the ancient machine, but its defenses were too strong for them. Then a miracle happened that stunned everyone. Dae-ho and Kael's crystalline forms glowed brightly. Their energy surged through the ley lines powerfully. They manifested as avatars of pure light. They stood before the weapon and placed hands on it. The machine absorbed too much power and exploded. The avatars turned to Yuna and the vessels. Dae-ho's avatar spoke with a voice of countless echoes. He said their sacrifice had not made them inactive. They would always protect the world they loved. They were the throne upon which reality now sat, but they were also its shield and its sword. The avatars faded away as the crisis ended. The people cheered for their eternal guardians. Yuna understood then the true nature of their existence. Dae-ho and Kael were not imprisoned on that roof. They were the world itself, now and always. Their reign was not over the ruins of the old. It was over the thriving beauty of the new, and they would watch over it forevermore. The sun set peacefully on a grateful world. The two moons did not appear in the sky, but sometimes their light could be felt in dreams, and sometimes their voices could be heard in the wind. They were the forgotten gods who were forgotten no more, and their vessel had become their eternal throne.